guys, so we're doing chapter 12, Jack Perrin, The Mystery of the UFOs. This is gonna be a long one, guys. The most amazing of all the cases. Okay, so this talks about another case in Brazil. On the 10th of December of 1966, there was a medical report that follows. It's very extensive and it talks about the details of the responsible for accompanying the case. I will present a resume, a summary of this document, preceded by the translation by Vilas Boas. Okay, so Vilas Boas was who the case happened to. Okay, let's go. The extraterrestrial woman from which Antonio Villas Boas had the sexual relationship had the skin very light, the eyes were like Chinese or Mongol. Usually, the race in Asia, the skin is yellowish or brownish. Also, we found the eyes of a Mongol in the Indian races of America, but the skin is red or brown. Vilas Boas had 25 years old when he had this adventure. On the 5th of October of 1957, he left about 23 hours at night because of the heat. It was very warm. He went to bed at 23 o'clock at night because of the heat. He left the window open about the window open. Meanwhile, he noticed that over the land in front of his house there was a light, a white light, phosphorescent, more brilliant than the moon, and that it illuminated all around it. It was very white, and he could not see where it was coming from. It was similar to the car lights, but it looked like it was coming from above. There was nothing in the sky from which this light could have come from. I had the need to wake up my brother that was sleeping on the same room, but because he didn't care about these things, he's I I thought it was best not to wake him up. I closed the window and went to bed. But because I couldn't sleep and I had such curiosity, I went and opened the window again and saw the light still on the same place. Suddenly, he noticed that this light was walking. on the direction of his window, so he closed the window very quickly. The noise woke up his brother. Both observed the light. Okay, so um, okay, so they observed the light for a while. Both of them observed the light for a while. Um, and then the light followed and went above their house, passing over their ceiling between the the roofing. Finally, it left and never came back. On the second episode, happened on the 14th of October. They should have been about 20, about 22 hours at night, and Antoni was um, working on the land with a tractor. Sometimes he worked at night because it was very hot during the day. So he saw the light again. This time it was a violet light that stopped on the north side of his land. It looked like it was about 100 meters from the ground. It was round and it illuminated a good part of the terrain. Antonio called his brother, but he didn't want to come again. This time he went alone to see what it was, to be more relieved, to be more relaxed. When he arrived there, the object quickly traveled to the south part of the field. This maneuver repeated several times. Antonio was tired, so he went to his brother, and they still saw the light once again, and it ended up disappearing very suddenly. On the next day, on the 15th, Antonio was working again with his tractor, but this time he was alone. The night was fresh and the sky was very full of stars. Precisely at 1 o'clock in the morning, he saw red stars in the sky that started to descend and approximated him. It went at a very quick speed. Suddenly, it was right over the tractor, and before he had any time to think what to do, afterwards the object um, descended about 15 meters from the ground, illuminating the ground like it was during the day. Antonio was scared. Had no idea what was happening. He thought of running away, but the slowliness of the tractor wouldn't help him. So he thought of climbing down the tractor and running. But the ground was soft because he'd just been working on the ground, so it wouldn't permit it to him to go very fast. So he stood 2 minutes without moving. Meanwhile, the object approximated a bit closer to him to about 10 to 15 meters, and it landed. Okay, so the object landed. Then Antonio could distinguish its shape. It was a weird machine, more or less roundish. The top had some red lights and a sort of a big projector that emitted light that he had seen before, but it was so strong that he couldn't distinguish the object. He could see now all the details. It had the form of an egg, but more elongated, with three sorts of metallic arms in the front, and one in the middle, and the other ones on top and on the side. I wasn't able to see the color because they were involved in a phosphorescence kind of red, kind of a fluorescent red. The top part of the object, the top part of the object, there was a machine, and there was a sort of a tower in the form of a dome. At the moment, wait a second, guys. Okay. Um, in the moment that the device reduced the velocity to go down to land, the red lights turned to green, and um, that related to a reduction in the speed of the rotation of the top part of the device. Like it's natural, I only noticed these details later because at the time I was too scared and nervous. When I saw three metallic legs, I noticed that it was a sort of a landing gear, and like the motor of the tractor. So he's comparing the machine to the tractor, guys. Um, so the motor of the tractor was still in march. So he tried to go around the machine to run away, but he only had done a few meters when the motor stopped and the lights of his tractor stopped, turned off. I thought it was weird because the ignition was still on the position of, of turning on the tractor. So I tried to put it on gear, but I couldn't. Then I opened the door of the tractor on the opposite side of the machine and I jumped to the ground. But because I lost some precious time trying to put the tractor on, and I only done a few steps when I felt I was grabbed. The aggressor was a short individual. He was about the size of my shoulder, and he was dressed in a weird way. On my despair, I turned suddenly and I could punch him. That threw him to the floor, about 2 meters. But straight away, I was attacked by another two individuals. He doesn't say two other individuals that grabbed him on his legs and his hands and never took the hands off of him. When they dragged him to the device, I started to scream, which must have surprised them because they stopped at any scream that I gave. They looked me fixedly, but never took their hands off of me. Um, this attitude of looking them fixedly calmed him up, but I couldn't stop screaming or kind of riling up a bit. So that's how they took him inside the device. It was about 2 meters from the ground over the three metallic legs. At the end, there opened a door in sorts of a corridor, and at the end there was a ladder with a silvery metal on the machine. The ladder kind of rolled out and he was kind of pushed in. It wasn't an easy work. The ladder was very slim and there could only fit two people on the side to side of the ladder, and it balanced a little bit, so it was flexible. And at each side, there was a metal cable, more or less the thickness and the form of a cable of a broom. I had the impression that it was made of um, kind of chain links over each other. Once inside, I was in an a compartment that was squared. The walls were a metal, shiny, reflecting a fluorescent light coming from small lamps, square lamps on the ceiling and on the top of the walls of the compartment. He couldn't count how many lights there were. Um, because the beings put him on the floor and closed the door. Um, it was clear as day inside, but even though I couldn't distinguish the seamings of the door, it was like it didn't existed. I knew where it was because the ladder um, was still hanging on the same place. At this time, there were five beings, and they made him a signal to go to the other room that he had seen already through an open door on one of the sides of the compartment. I don't know if the door was open when I got in because I couldn't look in that direction. I decided to obey because they were still grabbing me strongly, and above that, there was nothing else I could do. We left this small room where I didn't see any any sort of any sort of It was completely empty, this room, basically. That's how I can tell you guys. There was nothing inside this room. Um, they got in another room. This time was an oval shaped room, and the walls were still shiny. I think that we were in the center of the device. There was a metallic column on the middle that went from the floor to the ceiling. It was round and it looked very strong. The only thing I could see was a table in the weird shape surrounded by circular seatings, just like you see on bars. The the table and the seats were conical, uh, short, slim on the base, and they were also made of the same shiny metal as the walls, and they were seemingly fixed to the floor. During this time, it looked like it was very big. I remain. Oh, during a short while that looked like a long time, I was standing, being held by the two beings. Meanwhile, the other one were looking to me and talking between themselves. I say talking because in reality I could hear what didn't look like any human language. They were producing a sort of howling like the dogs, howling like the dogs. This similarity is very, uh, it's not very similar, it's the best I could get. It was several sounds mixed with the growling, and then they would finish the sounds in like they were shaking, like tremors. Uh, they were only sounds, screams of animal, nothing that looked like a language or a syllable. Even the words that have foreign for me. Meanwhile, I couldn't understand those voices. My voice wasn't adapted to those voices. That's when they completely made silence. I noticed that they got to a conclusion. I was grabbed by my belt, that they took me by force. I tried reacting to make the, the make the difficulty the movements that they want me to do. I protested and I screamed. I couldn't They couldn't understand me, but they stopped and looked me in the eyes to kind of give me the impression that they had no ill intentions. They never hit me or did me any harm. They didn't even ruin my clothes. Even my shirt was already damaged before. It wasn't them. I'm but I'm not sure. Finally, I was completely naked and I was scared without knowing what was gonna happen. After a while, one of them approximated with something on his hand. It looked like a sort of a sponge that he used it to to um, to pass it all over my body with a clear liquid like water, but it was thick without smell. It was a sort of an oil, but um, it wasn't a fatty oil because the skin wasn't oily. I was cold because the temperature was low. Above all, I was inside the machine. It was shaking before they gave me this bath, and now I was even more shaking. But that dried very quickly and it stayed like before. I was taken by three of the beings to another door to the opposite of the one that we had got in. They gave me a signal to accompany them, and uh, they did the howling sound once in a while. They pushed him inside of a room. They opened, pressing on something, a button or a handle. When the door closed, I noticed that it was a door that went from the ceiling to the floor. It had opened the two parts on the side of the inside of the compartment, and on the top there was a sort of an inscription, a luminous inscription, red, that because of that illumination, it looked like it had 5 centimeters in in thickness. It was the only inscription that I saw on the interior of the device. These signs were completely different of all of the signs I've ever seen. Okay, these are the signs, guys. These are the signs. Okay, guys, I hope you're enjoying.